Marcus Rodriguez had been having conversations with his mop for exactly 12 years, 3 months, and 16 days. Not that he was counting or anything. Well, okay, he was totally counting, but when you spend your days cleaning up after creatures that secrete purple goo when they laugh and somehow manage to get their lunch stuck to the ceiling, you tend to keep track of these things. "Another delightful morning in paradise, Moppy," he muttered, wringing out the stringy mess that passed for his cleaning companion. "Ready to see what fresh hell the diplomatic corps has cooked up for us today?" The galactic trade station buzzed with activity 47 levels above him, where important aliens in fancy robes discussed trade agreements and border disputes over expensive drinks that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. Down here in sublevel 12, where the air recyclers wheezed like asthmatic chain smokers and the lighting flickered with all the reliability of a politician's promise, Marcus dealt with the aftermath of their cultural exchanges. And by cultural exchanges, he meant the inevitable mess that happened when you put a dozen different species in the same room and expected them to get along. The Trilaxians left slime trails wherever they went. The Krillian delegates had a habit of molting during stressful negotiations, leaving behind what looked like the aftermath of a particularly violent pillow fight. And don't even get him started on the Vorthon eating habits. "You know what I love most about this job, Moppy?" Marcus said, attacking a particularly stubborn stain that was either dried Andromedan sweat or something he really didn't want to think too hard about. "The respect, the appreciation, the way everyone sees me as a valued member of the galactic community." A Trilaxian diplomat squelched past, trailing purple ooze and completely ignoring Marcus's existence. The alien was probably rushing to some vitally important meeting about trade tariffs on crystallized hydrogen, or whatever passed for high-stakes diplomacy these days. Marcus had served in 3 different wars, earned enough medals to set up a metal detector from orbit, and once held a position 12 jumps away from certain death for 18 hours straight while waiting for reinforcements that never came. These days, his biggest challenge was figuring out how to remove zero-gravity toilet paper from an air vent without asking too many questions about how it got there in the first place. 37 years old when I retired, he told his mop, pushing his cart down the corridor toward the diplomatic suites. Figured I'd take a nice, quiet job, see the galaxy, meet interesting people, clean up their bodily functions. The thing about being a janitor on a space station was that you became part of the background noise. Invisible. People talked around you like you weren't there, discussed sensitive information while you scrubbed their floors, made plans for galactic domination while you emptied their trash cans. Not that Marcus was complaining. After spending the better part of 2 decades having people shoot at him professionally, being ignored was almost refreshing. Almost. His cart squeaked as he made his way past the main diplomatic hall, where today's batch of self-important aliens would be discussing something that would probably affect the lives of billions of people across dozens of star systems. Through the thick doors, he could hear the familiar sound of raised voices and translator units working overtime to convert various species versions of "you're being unreasonable" into something diplomatically acceptable. "Another productive day in the Galactic Senate, I'm sure," Marcus observed, pausing to clean a suspicious stain off the wall. Nothing says advanced civilization like grown adults arguing over who gets to sit in the fancy chair. He'd been watching this dance for over a decade now, and it never got old. Well, actually, it got really old, but in that comfortable way that comes with routine. Aliens would arrive, make grand speeches about peace and cooperation, argue for 3 days about the color of the conference room walls, then leave feeling like they'd accomplished something meaningful. Meanwhile, Marcus cleaned up after them, and tried not to think about how much simpler things had been when his biggest worry was avoiding plasma fire and making sure his squad made it home in one piece. "You know what your problem is, Moppy," he said, giving the mop a contemplative look. "You're too optimistic, always thinking the next room is going to be cleaner than the last one." The mop, being an inanimate object, offered no response to this philosophical observation. Marcus shrugged and kept working. After all, someone had to keep this place running, and it sure wasn't going to be the aliens upstairs who thought manual labor was something you paid other people to worry about. Little did he know his quiet life of invisible servitude was about to get a whole lot more complicated. The first sign that today was going to be different came in the form of klaxons. Not the good kind of klaxons that meant time for lunch or shift change, but the dramatic, ear-splitting kind that usually preceded someone having a very bad day. Marcus paused mid-mop, listening to the announcement that crackled through the station's ancient intercom system. "All personnel to stations. The Zephyrin Empire delegation has arrived for scheduled negotiations. Repeat, all personnel to stations." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Well, Moppy, Looks like we've got new players in the game. Hope they're house-trained. The Zephyrians were what you might charitably call new to the galactic scene, which was diplomatic speak for showed up last month with really big guns and an attitude problem. From what Marcus had overheard during his cleaning rounds, they claimed to represent some sort of massive empire from the far side of the galaxy, and seemed to think that entitled them to special treatment. Which, if history was any guide, meant Marcus would be cleaning up their messes by the end of the week. He made his way toward the upper levels, following the trail of suddenly very nervous-looking diplomats and station personnel. The humans looked particularly twitchy, which wasn't exactly surprising. Humans were still considered the new kids in galactic politics, barely a century out from first contact and still trying to prove they belonged at the big kids' table. The main docking bay was buzzing with activity when Marcus arrived, positioning himself in a corner where he could work on polishing some fictional scuff marks while watching the show. The Zephyrian ship was impressive, he had to admit, sleek, black, and covered in enough weapon ports to turn a small moon into asteroid debris. Subtle. Definitely compensating for something, Marcus muttered, scrubbing at a perfectly clean wall panel. The airlock cycled with a hiss that somehow managed to sound both theatrical and vaguely threatening. Smoke billowed out, because apparently dramatic entrances were a universal constant across all species. Through the artificial fog strode Ambassador Klaxon, and Marcus had to suppress a snort of laughter. The alien looked like someone had crossed a peacock with a particularly arrogant rooster, then given it a law degree and an attitude problem. Brilliant blue and green feathers rippled across its body, and its head was crowned with what could only be described as the universe's most ridiculous hat. Behind Klaxon marched a dozen Zephyrian soldiers, each one looking like they'd been specifically designed to intimidate small children and impress nobody else. "Greetings," Klaxon announced, in a voice that managed to make even that simple word sound condescending. "I am Ambassador Klaxon of the Zephyrian Empire, here to discuss terms with your quaint little alliance." Marcus watched as Director Hayes, the station's chief diplomat, stepped forward with the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Welcome to Harmony Station, Ambassador. We're honored to host these negotiations." "Yes," Klaxon replied, looking around the docking bay like he was inspecting something distasteful he'd found on the bottom of his shoe. "I'm sure you are. Now, I trust quarters have been prepared for my delegation? Something appropriate to our status, naturally." "Of course. The VIP suites on level 15 have been—" "Level 15? Klaxon's feathers ruffled, with what Marcus recognized as universal alien outrage. "I was told you had level 50 available." "Well, yes, but level 50 is reserved for your betters, clearly." "Very well, we shall make do with this adequate accommodation. I trust the servants understand their place." Marcus felt his grip tighten on his mop handle. Something about the way Klaxon said servants made his old military instinct start whispering unpleasant things in the back of his mind. Director Hayes maintained his diplomatic smile with what Marcus recognized as considerable effort. "Our staff is well-trained and professional, I assure you." Klaxon's gaze swept across the assembled humans, dismissing each one with the casual indifference of someone looking at furniture. "Yes, I suppose servant species do have their uses. Lead the way." And that's when Marcus discovered that 12 years of cleaning floors hadn't quite killed the part of him that used to solve problems with extreme prejudice. The procession moved through the station like a parade of egos, with Klaxon making comments about everything from the primitive architecture to the quaint attempts at decoration. Marcus followed at a discreet distance, officially there to clean up any messes but really just morbidly curious about how badly this was going to go. It went badly. During the tour of the diplomatic wing, Klaxon accidentally stepped on Deputy Director Kim's foot, then acted surprised when she yelped in pain. He dismissed the human cultural exchange officer as a decorative servant, and suggested that perhaps the real negotiators would be joining them later. Marcus watched it all while methodically cleaning the same section of handrail for the third time, his knuckles gradually turning white around the handle of his cleaning supplies. But the final straw came when they reached the main conference room. As Director Hayes was explaining the seating arrangements, Klaxon suddenly stopped and pointed directly at him. "You, servant." Hayes looked around, confused, before realizing the alien was talking to him. "I'm sorry? Fetch me refreshment. Something suitable for a being of my importance." The silence that followed was the kind that usually preceded either extremely awkward apologies or extremely violent incidents. Marcus felt his hand drift toward his belt, where 30 years ago he might have carried something more useful than a spray bottle full of industrial-strength cleaner. Director Hayes cleared his throat carefully. "Ambassador, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. I'm the director of—" "I don't care what your title is among your own kind," Klaxon interrupted, waving a dismissive wing. "To the Zephyrian Empire, you are all servants. Some of you may have fancier servant jobs, but servants nonetheless. Now, my refreshment." Marcus stopped cleaning. Very slowly, he turned to look at the pompous alien who had just called the entire human species servants. In his peripheral vision, he could see the other humans in the corridor, frozen, in various states of shock and outrage. Director Hayes' diplomatic training was warring visibly with what was probably a very strong urge to punch something. "Well," Marcus said quietly to his mop, "this should be interesting." 3 days later, Marcus was beginning to think that maybe the universe had a sense of humor after all. A really twisted, sadistic sense of humor that enjoyed watching decent people suffer through PowerPoint presentations about cultural sensitivity and interspecies workplace harmony. "Day 3 of the Zephyrian occupation," he muttered to Moppy while cleaning the corridor outside the human quarters. "Also known as day 3 of me practicing my anger management techniques." The negotiations had been going about as well as expected, which was to say they'd devolved into the Zephyrians making increasingly outrageous demands while treating the human staff like furniture that occasionally needed to be told to fetch coffee. Marcus had watched Director Hayes age approximately 5 years in 72 hours, and the man was starting to develop a twitch that probably wasn't stress. But today was different. Today, the Zephyrians had decided that security concerns required them to conduct routine inspections of all human living quarters, which was military speak for, "We're going to ransack your stuff and call it official business." Marcus had been strategically cleaning nearby when Commander Vex arrived with his inspection team. If Ambassador Klaxon looked like a peacock with delusions of grandeur, Vex looked like someone had crossed a Komodo dragon with a tax auditor and given it military training. His scales were a dull green-gray that seemed designed to drain the joy out of any room he entered, and his eyes had the cold, calculating look of someone who enjoyed finding things wrong with other people's lives. "This is highly irregular," Director Hayes was saying as he led the Zephyrian soldiers through the residential section. "The Galactic Accords clearly state that diplomatic immunity extends to—" "The Galactic Accords," Vex replied in a voice like grinding metal, "were written by species that the Zephyrian Empire had not yet encountered. We prefer to establish our own protocols." Marcus pushed his cart a little closer, pretending to be very interested in a scuff mark that definitely hadn't been there yesterday. Through the open doorway of Lieutenant Thompson's quarters, he could see Zephyrian soldiers methodically going through personal belongings with the kind of thorough disregard for privacy that would make a police state proud. "Fascinating," Vex was saying as he examined a framed photograph of Thompson's family. "Your species seems unusually attached to genetic relatives. Most civilized races move beyond such primitive social bonds." Thompson, who was standing in the corner looking like he was actively trying to calculate how much trouble he'd get in for punching an alien diplomat, managed to keep his voice level. "It's called love, Commander. You might have heard of it." "Ah, yes, love." Vex set the photograph down with the careful precision of someone handling something distasteful. "Another quaint, primitive concept. No doubt this emotional attachment makes you excellent servants. Loyalty through sentiment rather than logic." Marcus felt his hand tighten on the mop handle. Again. The inspection continued down the corridor, with Vex making observations about human primitive social structures and servant-class living conditions, while his soldiers systematically violated every concept of personal privacy known to civilized beings. Marcus followed at what he hoped was a discreet distance, ostensibly cleaning, but really just trying to resist the urge to introduce Commander Vex to some very advanced human concepts involving blunt force trauma. They were 3 doors down from Marcus's own quarters when he realized he had a problem. A very specific, very military-shaped problem currently sitting in a sealed container under his bed. "Moppy," he said quietly, "I think we might be in trouble." His quarters were small, sparse, and exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd spent most of his adult life learning to live out of a duffel bag. A narrow bed, a small desk, a closet that barely deserved the name, and absolutely nothing that would indicate its occupant had ever been anything more exciting than a janitor, except for the locked metal box hidden under the bed behind a loose wall panel. Marcus watched from the doorway as Vex's soldiers began their systematic search, trying to look like he was just another curious human watching the show. One soldier was going through his closet, probably disappointed by the complete lack of anything interesting. Another was examining his desk. which contained nothing more exciting than duty rosters and a collection of technical manuals for industrial cleaning equipment. But the third soldier was getting uncomfortably close to the bed. "Nothing of interest here," the closet soldier reported in the clipped, efficient tone that Marcus recognized from every military organization in the galaxy. "Continue searching," Vex ordered, running one clawed finger along Marcus's bookshelf. "Servants often hide things they believe their betters would find threatening." The soldier near the bed knelt down and peered underneath. Marcus held his breath. "Commander, there appears to be some kind of concealment behind this panel." Marcus closed his eyes. "Well, hell. Remove it." There was a brief sound of metal on metal, then the distinctive click of a lock being forced. Marcus opened his eyes to see the soldier pulling out a rectangular metal container about the size of a shoebox, the kind of thing military personnel used to store important documents and personal items that needed to survive everything from orbital bombardment to really determined customs inspectors. "Interesting," Vex said, taking the box from his subordinate. "Our humble servant appears to have secrets." The box opened with a soft click, and Marcus watched Vex's expression change from mild curiosity to something that might have been confusion if reptilian faces were better at expressing emotion. Inside the box, nestled in protective foam, were 17 military decorations. Not the kind of participation trophies that got handed out for showing up and following orders. These were the real deal. Campaign medals from 3 different wars, a Purple Heart with cluster, the Sol System Defense Medal with 3 battle stars, the Titan Campaign ribbon with combat designation, and right there in the center, impossible to miss, the Star of Terra with crossed combat drops insignia. The kind of medal they only gave to people who'd done things that other people wrote legends about. Vex lifted out the Star of Terra with the careful movements of someone handling something they didn't quite understand. "Commander Rodriguez," he read from the engraving, his translator struggling with the human script. "For conspicuous gallantry in the face of overwhelming odds during the siege of Ganymede Station." The silence that followed was the kind that usually preceded either very awkward explanations or very violent misunderstandings. Marcus cleared his throat. "Yeah, that's mine." Every head in the room turned toward him, Vex's cold, reptilian eyes fixed on Marcus like targeting lasers, and suddenly the humble janitor routine wasn't feeling quite as comfortable as it used to. "Commander Rodriguez," Vex repeated slowly. "Not Janitor Rodriguez." Marcus shrugged, going for casual and probably missing by several light years. "Well, I mean, technically I'm both. The commanding thing was more of a previous career situation." "Previous career?" Vex set the metal back in the box with deliberate precision. "And what, exactly, did this previous career involve?" Marcus looked around the room at the Zephyrian soldiers, all of whom were now paying considerably more attention to him than they had been 5 minutes ago. In the doorway, he could see Director Hayes and several other station personnel craning their necks to see what had caused the sudden change in atmosphere. "Oh, you know," Marcus said, aiming for the kind of casual tone you might use to discuss the weather or last night's dinner. "The usual. Shooting things, getting shot at, blowing stuff up when diplomacy failed to produce the desired results." He paused, noticing that several more people had gathered in the corridor and were listening with what might charitably be called intense interest. Which, now that I think about it, was pretty much all the time. Commander Vex studied Marcus with the kind of intense focus usually reserved for particularly challenging crossword puzzles or suspicious-looking packages. The Zephyrian's scaled head tilted slightly to one side, and Marcus could practically hear the mental gears grinding as the alien tried to reconcile humble janitor with decorated war hero. "Perhaps," Vex said slowly, "we should discuss this in a more appropriate setting." 20 minutes later, Marcus found himself in Conference Room C, which was the station's polite way of saying, the place where we have uncomfortable conversations that might end badly. Vex sat across from him at a table that had probably seen its share of tense negotiations, while 2 Zephyrian soldiers flanked the doorway like the world's most intimidating bookends. The metal box sat open between them, its contents gleaming under the harsh conference room lighting. 17 pieces of metal and ribbon that represented more combat experience than most people saw in a lifetime, and definitely more than anyone expected from a guy who spent his days arguing with cleaning equipment. "The Titan Wars," Vex said, holding up the campaign medal like it was evidence in a particularly interesting court case. "I confess, Commander Rodriguez, that the Zephyrian Empire's historical records make no mention of these conflicts." Marcus leaned back in his chair, going for the kind of casual posture that said, "This is all perfectly normal," while secretly calculating the distance to the nearest exit. Yeah, well, we tend to keep our family business to ourselves. Humans are funny that way. Family business. Vex's translator made the phrase sound vaguely threatening. And what exactly did this family business involve? Oh, you know, the usual post-colonial cleanup work. We'd been terraforming Jupiter's moons for about 50 years when the mining corporations decided they wanted to upgrade their operation. Brought in some really impressive AI-controlled mining mechs. Very efficient, very thorough, very homicidal. Marcus picked up his Star of Terra and turned it over in his hands, remembering. Turns out when you program a machine to extract resources at maximum efficiency, and you don't specifically tell it that humans aren't resources, well, they get creative with their problem solving. Vex's eyes narrowed. You fought machines? Fought, survived, occasionally got lucky and won. The mechs were about 12 feet tall, armored like battleships and equipped with mining lasers that could cut through a spacesuit faster than you could say worker compensation claim. Plus they had this annoying habit of learning from their mistakes, which made killing them progressively more challenging as the war went on. How many of these machines were there? Marcus shrugged. At the peak, maybe 10,000 active units across all the outer moons. They had automated factories, pumping out new ones faster than we could destroy them. Took us 8 years to shut down the last production facility. The silence that followed this revelation was broken only by the soft hum of the station's life support systems. Vex was staring at Marcus like he'd just admitted to personally wrestling black holes for entertainment. 10,000 combat units, Vex repeated slowly. And you defeated them? Well, I had help. About 2 million other humans who were equally motivated to not get turned into raw materials for industrial processing. Turns out people fight pretty hard when the alternative is getting fed into a recycling plant. Marcus set the metal back in the box and picked up another one. This one shaped like a shield with crossed swords. This one's from the Martian Rebellion. That was a more traditional war, if you can call civil war traditional. Bunch of colonial separatists decided they didn't want to pay taxes to Earth anymore. Built themselves a pretty impressive military for a bunch of farmers and miners. And you fought your own species? Politics. Marcus waved a hand dismissively. Never could make sense of it myself. But orders were orders, and someone had to keep the shipping lanes open. Spent 3 years chasing rebels through the asteroid belt. They knew the territory better than we did, had better ships, and were fighting on their home turf, made for some interesting tactical challenges. He picked up a third medal, this one a simple bronze star, with a red ribbon. This is from the Outer Rim piracy suppression. Not really a war, more like an extended law enforcement action with better weapons and worse odds. Pirates had gotten organized, started hitting civilian transports with military-grade hardware. Someone had to explain to them why that was impolite. Vex was now holding Marcus's service record, a document that had apparently been tucked into the back of the metal box. The Zephyrine scaled fingers traced down the list of battles, deployments, and commendations, with what might have been growing concern. Ganymede Station, Europa Mining Complex, the Siege of Ceres, the Battle of the Trojan Asteroids. Vex looked up from the document. You were present at all of these engagements? Present. Accounted for and occasionally in charge when the officers got themselves killed faster than command could replace them. Happens a lot in war, actually. People in fancy uniforms tend to make tempting targets. And after these conflicts ended, you became a janitor? Marcus grinned, and for the first time since the inspection began, he looked genuinely amused. What can I say? Military retirement benefits aren't what they used to be. Plus, I'd spent 30 years getting shot at professionally. Figured it was time to try a career where people weren't actively trying to kill me. But surely someone with your experience would be valuable to your military forces. Oh, I'm sure they'd love to have me back, but here's the thing about humans, Commander Vex. We fight when we have to, not because we want to. When the wars were over, most of us were happy to hang up our guns and find something more peaceful to do with our lives. Marcus gestured around the conference room. Hence the glamorous career in sanitation services. It's honest work, nobody shoots at me, and the biggest threat I face on a daily basis is accidentally mixing the wrong cleaning chemicals and creating chlorine gas. Vex was quiet for a long moment, still studying the service record. Finally, he looked up. How many others? How many other what? How many other humans on this station are veterans? Marcus considered the question, tilting his head thoughtfully. Well, let's see. Lieutenant Thompson in Quarters 247 was a combat engineer during the Belt campaigns. Rodriguez in the cafeteria served with the 7th Infantry during the Martian thing. Patel in maintenance was a Navy tech specialist. Johnson from security used to run a reconnaissance unit. He paused, doing a mental count. Actually, now that I think about it, pretty much everyone in the service departments is ex-military. Not really surprising when you consider that most of us learn to work under pressure, follow orders, and keep equipment running in hostile environments. Makes us pretty good at jobs that nobody else wants to do. Vex's expression had moved from confusion through concern, and was now settling somewhere in the neighborhood of alarm. Are you telling me that this station is staffed by trained military personnel? Oh no, Marcus said quickly. That would be ridiculous. Vex relaxed slightly. We're staffed by trained military personnel who are pretending to be janitors, cooks, and maintenance workers because we wanted quiet jobs where nobody would bother us. Vex did not relax. Marcus picked up his medals and started placing them carefully back in their box. The funny thing about humans, Commander, is that we don't really have a warrior caste like most species. We don't divide our population into soldiers and civilians and keep them separate. When we need fighters, we take ordinary people and train them. When we don't need fighters anymore, those same people go back to being ordinary. But the training doesn't go away. He closed the box with a soft click and looked directly at Vex. We're all the warrior caste, Commander. We just don't mention it unless someone gives us a reason to. The silence that followed was broken by a soft chime from Vex's communication device. The Zephyrin answered it with obvious relief, probably grateful for any excuse to end this increasingly uncomfortable conversation. Commander, came the voice from the device. Ambassador Claxon requests an immediate briefing on your inspection findings. Vex looked at Marcus, then at the metal box, then back at Marcus again. Tell the ambassador that the situation has become more complex than originally anticipated. Marcus grinned. Yeah, that's us humans. We're just full of surprises. The arrest attempt came exactly 43 minutes later, which Marcus thought showed remarkable restraint on Ambassador Claxon's part. He'd been expecting something stupid within the first 20 minutes. He was mopping the corridor outside Conference Room A when the Zephian soldiers arrived, moving with the kind of purposeful stride that usually meant someone was about to have a very bad day. Marcus recognized the formation immediately. Classic arrest pattern, designed to overwhelm and intimidate. Very professional, assuming your targets were civilians who'd never seen combat. Marcus Rodriguez, Commander Vex announced, flanked by 6 armed soldiers. By order of Ambassador Claxon, you are to be detained as a potential security threat to Zephyrian operations. Marcus looked down at his mop, then back at Vex. You know, Commander, I'm starting to think you folks don't understand humans very well. That's when the cafeteria door opened and Rodriguez stepped out, still wearing his apron, but moving with the fluid precision of someone who'd spent years clearing buildings under fire. Behind him came Patel from maintenance, Johnson from security, and Thompson from quarters management. None of them were armed. All of them looked like they were about to solve a problem. Evening, Tank, Rodriguez said, using Marcus's old unit call sign with casual familiarity. These guys bothering you? Nothing I can't handle, Rico, Marcus replied, wringing out his mop with deliberate slowness. Just a little misunderstanding about my employment history. More doors opened. The night shift was apparently finishing up and they all seemed to be taking their break at exactly the same time. Marcus counted 12 humans in the corridor now, all wearing the uniforms of various service departments, all standing with the relaxed alertness of people who'd learned to be ready for trouble. Vex's head swiveled between the humans, his reptilian brain clearly trying to process this sudden change in the tactical situation. Stand back. This is official Zephyrian business. Actually, said Johnson, whose security badge gleamed under the corridor lights, this is human business now. Tank, you want to explain to these folks why arresting you might be problematic? Marcus set his mop aside and straightened up, and somehow the simple change in posture transformed him from humble janitor to something considerably more dangerous. Well, the thing is, Commander, when you threaten one of us, you're kind of threatening all of us. It's another one of those quaint human customs you might want to learn about. We are simply following proper security protocols, Vex insisted, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Security protocols, Patel laughed, a sound completely devoid of humor. You want to talk about security protocols? Let me tell you about security protocols. She pulled out what looked like a standard maintenance tablet and tapped it twice. Suddenly, every screen in the corridor flickered to life, displaying what appeared to be technical schematics of the station's critical systems. Life support, artificial gravity, main power distribution, docking bay controls, Patel said conversationally. Funny thing about being maintenance staff, you get access to everything that keeps a space station from becoming a very expensive tomb. Thompson pulled out his own device. Communications, internal security, guest quarters, environmental controls, facilities management has some interesting responsibilities. Rodriguez cracked his knuckles. And food service controls the water supply, atmospheric recycling, and waste management. Amazing how many ways there are to make someone's day unpleasant when you really put your mind to it. Marcus watched Vex's expression shift from confusion to understanding, to something that might have been fear. Now, Commander, I'm sure we can work this out like civilized beings. After all, we're all professionals here. What do you want? Vex asked, his weapon still drawn but no longer pointed quite as confidently in Marcus's direction. Nothing complicated, Marcus replied. We want Ambassador Claxon to apologize to Director Hayes for the servant comment. We want respectful treatment for all human personnel. And we want you to stop calling us a servant species. And if we refuse? Marcus looked around at his fellow veterans, all of whom were watching the Zephrans with the patient attention of predators evaluating prey. Well, that's your choice, but I should probably mention that those cargo ships that arrived yesterday aren't carrying supplies. Vex's communication device chimed urgently. He answered it with obvious reluctance. Commander! The voice was high-pitched with what sounded like panic. Our ships are reporting massive contact signatures approaching from the outer system. Military formations, hundreds of vessels. Marcus nodded approvingly. Ah, right on schedule. That'll be the Veterans Association annual reunion. Happens every year about this time. Bunch of retired military folks getting together to swap war stories and complain about how soft the younger generation has got. Veterans Association? Vex's voice had climbed several octaves. Oh yeah. See, the thing about human veterans is that we stay in touch. Professional networking, you might call it. When word gets out that someone's been disrespecting active duty personnel, well, Marcus shrugged. People take it personally. Johnson checked his tablet. Looks like Admiral Patterson's entire 3rd Fleet reunion group, plus Commodore Kim's Martian Veterans Brigade. Oh, and the Titan campaign survivors are bringing their grandkids. Family outing. They're all veterans? Vex whispered. Vex, Marcus said gently. Every human who fought in the wars is still alive. We're talking about people who spent decades learning to kill things that were bigger, stronger, and better armed than they were. And now they're all retired with nothing but time on their hands and a really strong opinion about proper military courtesy. The Zephyrian soldiers were now looking decidedly uncomfortable, weapons lowered and eyes darting between the various exits. So, Marcus continued, picking up his mop again, here's what's going to happen. You're going to go back to Ambassador Claxon and explain that humans aren't servants. We're predators, pretending to be house pets. And if he wants to keep pretending this is a diplomatic mission instead of a really elaborate suicide attempt, he might want to adjust his attitude. Vex backed toward the corridor junction, his soldiers moving with him. This is not over. Commander, Marcus called after him. It was over before it started. You just didn't know it yet. As the Zephyrians retreated, Rico turned to Marcus with a grin. Think they'll learn? Marcus looked down at his mop, which had somehow become a symbol of everything the aliens had misunderstood about humanity. Probably not. But that's okay. Teaching moments are always more fun anyway. The emergency diplomatic session lasted exactly 7 minutes, which Marcus figured was probably some kind of record for intergalactic crisis resolution. He wasn't officially invited, of course. He was just the janitor who happened to be mopping the corridor outside the main conference room when Ambassador Claxon started screaming about deception and hidden military assets in a voice that could probably be heard 3 decks away. Through the partially open door, Marcus could see Claxon pacing frantically, while Director Hayes sat calmly at the conference table, looking like a man who just discovered he held all the cards in a poker game he hadn't realized he was playing. You lied to us, Claxon squawked, his ridiculous feathers standing on end. Your entire staff is military personnel in disguise. Not in disguise, Hayes corrected mildly. Just retired. There's a difference. But they're trained killers. Well, yes. But they're trained killers who chose to become janitors and cooks instead of staying trained killers. I'd think you'd find that reassuring. Commander Vex spoke up from his position near the wall, where he looked like he was seriously reconsidering his career choices. Ambassador, I've reviewed the tactical situation. Our forces are significantly outnumbered. By janitors. By decorated combat veterans with 30 years of experience fighting wars we've never heard of, who have complete control of our life support systems and are backed up by what appears to be half the human military in retirement, Vex replied, with the patience of someone explaining basic math to a particularly slow child. Marcus paused in his mopping to peer through the door gap. Actually, he called out, it's more like a third. The other 2/3 are probably on their way. The room went very quiet. Hayes cleared his throat diplomatically. Perhaps we should discuss new terms for our relationship. Klaxon deflated like a punctured balloon. What do you want? An apology would be nice, Hayes said. Recognition of human sovereignty. Maybe some trade agreements that don't involve the word servant anywhere in the documentation. And if we refuse? Marcus stuck his head through the doorway, still holding his mop. Well, Ambassador, here's the thing you need to understand about humans. We don't have a warrior class because we don't need one. Every human you've met, from the guy who serves your dinner to the lady who fixes your air conditioning, grew up hearing stories about their grandparents who fought in the colony wars, their parents who survived the AI uprising, their siblings who served in the pirate suppression camp. He stepped fully into the room, dripping mop water on what was probably a very expensive carpet. We're not a peaceful species pretending to be warriors. We're a warrior species pretending to be peaceful, and we're really, really good at pretending right up until someone gives us a reason to stop. Through the conference room's main view screen, the first wave of human ships was now visible, their running lights twinkling like deadly stars against the black of space. Those aren't military vessels, Klaxon protested weakly. No, Marcus agreed. They're fishing boats, cargo haulers, passenger liners, and recreational craft, operated by people who used to fly attack fighters, command destroyers, and plan orbital bombardments. Funny thing about military training, Ambassador. It doesn't expire when you change careers. Hayes stood up, straightening his diplomatic jacket. So, shall we discuss those new terms now? 2 hours later, Marcus was back to mopping floors, humming quietly to himself while he worked. The Zephyrian delegation had left in considerably more of a hurry than they'd arrived, and the station was slowly returning to its normal, boring routine. Well, Moppy, he said to his faithful cleaning companion, that was educational. Remind me to update my resume. Apparently Janitor doesn't fully capture my skill set. Behind him, footsteps approached. Marcus turned to see Director Hayes, looking more relaxed than he had in days. Marcus, Hayes said, I wanted to thank you. That could have gone very badly. Marcus shrugged. Just doing my job, sir. Keeping the station clean and functional. Right. Hayes paused. You know, I've been thinking. Maybe we should update the personnel files. Make sure everyone's qualifications are properly documented. Probably not necessary, Marcus replied, wringing out his mop. Most of us like being underestimated. Makes life simpler. As Hayes walked away, Marcus returned to his work, whistling an old military march under his breath. Overhead, the human ships were already dispersing, their crews probably looking forward to getting back to their own quiet, peaceful retirements. After all, someone had to keep the galaxy clean. And if that someone happened to know 17 different ways to kill you with a mop handle, well, that was just good customer service. Marcus smiled and got back to work. It was, after all, an honest living.